Welcome to True Echo, where real courage, loyalty, and the fight for justice come to life. In today's gripping story, what starts as a routine evening turns into a heart-pounding battle between innocence and danger. Stay with us as we unfold a tale of bravery, loyalty, and a twist that no one saw coming. The sky over Sunrest Valley was brushed in bruised shades of crimson and violet as dusk surrendered to night. Street lamps buzzed and flickered, fighting the darkness with a feeble glow. 11-year-old Rosie Collins clutched a crinkled paper bag of groceries against her chest, her second-hand sneakers scuffing the cracked sidewalk as she hurried home. The chill in the air crept under her faded pink jacket, making her shiver with more than just cold. Beside her, Trooper, her sturdy German shepherd, walked with keen vigilance. His ears twitched at every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. He was no ordinary pet. He moved with a soldier's discipline, his gaze sweeping the shadows for unseen dangers. Rosie trusted him with her life, though she only half understood the depth of training embedded in every muscle of his body. Her father, Officer Daniel Collins, had warned her countless times to stay vigilant. The town had changed, whispers of crime rings and biker gangs had unsettled the once peaceful streets. Rosie had promised she'd be home before dark. But a long line at the corner store had delayed her, and now unease gnawed at her as night thickened. A soft growl rumbled from Trooper's throat. Rosie froze, heart pounding. She squinted ahead, seeing lights approaching. At first she thought it was car headlights, until she heard the roar of motorcycle engines splitting the night air. Fear clawed at her chest. She remembered her father's warnings about the Silver Skulls, a gang known for intimidation, their leather vests emblazoned with a silver-flamed skull. Trooper moved closer, his body tense, a living shield between Rosie and the threat. She stepped off the sidewalk, hoping to melt into the shadows, praying the bikers would pass. But instead, the engine sputtered and died as four men in dark vests pulled their motorcycles into a loose circle around her. One by one, they dismounted, their boots hitting the ground in eerie unison. The leader was a lanky man with a deep scar cutting across his left cheek. He removed his helmet, greasy hair falling into his black eyes. A mocking grin curled his lips. Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, his voice syrupy with menace. "Little late for errands, ain't it, sweetheart?" Rosie clutched the bag tighter, feeling her knees weaken. Trooper emitted a low, warning growl, stepping in front of her. The bikers chuckled, at first. But there was a tone in Trooper's growl, something primal, something dangerous that gave them pause. The bald, broad-shouldered biker sneered and raised his boot as if to kick the dog. In a blur, Trooper tensed, his body coiled to strike. The laughter around her died abruptly. "Careful," muttered one of the bikers, stepping back. "That much trained." Scarface Jackson sneered. "Trained or not, it's 4 against 1. Hand over the bag, kid." Rosie's mind raced. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Stay calm. Draw attention if you can. Trust your dog." "Just heading home," she said, voice trembling but clear. Jackson took a step forward, menace radiating from him. "See, we got a little message for your old man. Cops like him think they run this town. Time someone reminded them who's boss." He reached out, his hands snatching at her grocery bag. Before he could touch her, Rosie heard herself shout the command. "Trooper, guard." It was like flipping a switch. Trooper lunged, a snarling mass of muscle and fury. His teeth sank into the nearest biker's arm with surgical precision, immobilizing without maiming, just as he'd been trained. Chaos exploded. Shouts, swearing, the revving of motorcycles. One biker tried to yank Trooper away, another lunged at Rosie. She stumbled backward, heart hammering in her ears. Through the maelstrom, Trooper shifted targets fluidly, defending her like a seasoned warrior. Out of the corner of her eye, Rosie caught a figure sprinting under the flickering streetlights, her father's silhouette, his gun drawn low. "Drop it!" Daniel roared, voice cutting through the night like a blade. The bikers froze. Trooper remained in attack stance, chest heaving, but his eyes flicked to Daniel for instruction. One by one, the bikers were disarmed and cuffed, local backup officers arriving moments later with flashing lights and shouted orders. Rosie sagged against a lamppost, the grocery bag forgotten at her feet. Tears blurred her vision as Daniel scooped her into his arms, whispering hoarse reassurances. Trooper circled them protectively, blood streaking his fur from the biker's jacket he'd bitten. He didn't even seem to notice the injury. His gaze never left Rosie. "You saved her, boy," Daniel murmured thickly, kneeling to grip Trooper's scruff affectionately. "You saved my baby girl." But Rosie, despite the overwhelming relief, knew deep down this wasn't over. The Silver Skulls wouldn't forget. And somewhere in the shadows, vengeance still simmered. The events of the night left Rosie trembling long after the bikers had been hauled away in handcuffs. Her father's cruiser rumbled quietly as they made the slow drive home, Trooper curled up in the back seat, head resting on his paws, eyes still sharp despite his exhaustion. The familiar streets of Sunrest Valley, once so comforting, now looked strange and hostile under the sodium orange glow of streetlights. Daniel kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking on both Rosie and Trooper. He said little, but his jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face twitched. When they finally pulled into their driveway, Rosie hesitated before getting out. Their small white house, with its peeling shutters and sagging porch swing, now seemed vulnerable, too exposed to the darkness. Inside, Daniel checked every lock, every window, every room. He moved with the methodical precision of a man who had seen too much, who knew too well how quickly safety could turn to chaos. Rosie sat on the worn couch, arms wrapped around herself, the events replaying in a feverish loop in her mind. Trooper lay at her feet, his head nudging her ankle every few minutes as if grounding her back to reality. She reached down and ran her fingers through his coarse fur, finding comfort in his steady presence. Daniel finally sank into the armchair opposite her, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're safe now," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "I promise." Rosie looked up, her voice a whisper. "Dad, why did they come after me?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Because of me. Because I'm a cop who doesn't look the other way. Jackson Price, the guy with the scar, you saw him tonight. He's been trying to tighten his grip on this town for a while now. And your old man's been making that difficult." Rosie swallowed, the weight of it sinking into her bones. It wasn't just random violence. It was personal. Daniel saw the fear flicker in her eyes and reached out, clasping her hand in his. "Listen to me, Rosie. None of this is your fault. These men, they live by fear and intimidation. But we don't. We stand up. We fight back. And we protect what's ours." Rosie nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional soft grunt from Trooper as he shifted positions. Finally, Daniel stood and crossed to a high cabinet in the kitchen, unlocking it with a small key he kept around his neck. Inside were a few important documents, and a gun. He checked the magazine, made sure it was loaded, then set it down near the couch. Rosie watched with wide eyes. "It's just a precaution," he said gently. "You won't need to touch it. Trooper and I will handle anything that comes our way." That night, Rosie slept in her father's room, Trooper stretched out between the bed and the door like a living barrier. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, made her flinch. But Trooper never moved. He stayed awake most of the night, only allowing himself to drift off in short bursts, always ready to leap to her defense at the slightest threat. When morning finally bled gray light through the curtains, Rosie felt like she hadn't slept at all. She rubbed her eyes and sat up slowly. Daniel was already awake, brewing coffee in the kitchen, his uniform shirt half-buttoned. His face was pale, drawn tight with worry. He poured her a glass of orange juice and slid it across the counter. "You're staying home today," he said. "School can wait. The station's gonna need me for paperwork, but I've arranged for Officer Morris to keep an eye on the house from a cruiser outside." Rosie opened her mouth to protest. She didn't want to be left alone even for a second, but Daniel shook his head. "Trooper stays with you. And you're not really alone. Ria's one of the best. And I'll be just a phone call away." Trooper nudged her knee with his nose as if reinforcing Daniel's point. "We're here. We've got you." Rosie exhaled shakily. "Okay." By midday, Rosie found herself curled up on the living room couch again, the TV on low, Trooper snoozing beside her. She tried to distract herself with cartoons, but her mind kept drifting back to the alley, to the bikers' sneers, to the glint of knives under leather jackets. Would they really dare come back after what happened? Would they risk another confrontation now that the police knew? She glanced out the front window. Officer Ria Morris sat in her cruiser across the street, sunglasses reflecting the cloudless sky. Rosie felt a little safer knowing she was there. But she also knew gang members like Jackson didn't play by normal rules. They thrived on fear. The afternoon dragged on, a slow, grinding crawl. Rosie attempted some homework, reading a few pages from her battered English textbook, but nothing stuck. She kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until her father would return. Trooper stirred suddenly, his head lifting. His ears pricked forward, nose twitching. Rosie immediately set her textbook aside, heart hammering. A motorcycle engine rumbled somewhere in the distance. Rosie stiffened, instinctively reaching out to Trooper. But then the sound faded, replaced by the normal hum of suburban life, cars passing, dogs barking, the occasional shout of a playing child. Trooper settled back down, though his body remained alert. Rosie swallowed hard. The fear wasn't going away. Even in daylight, even surrounded by people who cared about her, she felt like she was standing on a crumbling ledge with no safety net. Hours later, the sun finally dipped toward the horizon, painting the world in hues of orange and purple. Daniel's squad car pulled into the driveway, and Rosie ran to the door before he even made it up the steps. He caught her in a hug, holding her tightly. "Long day?" he murmured. Rosie nodded against his chest. "Too long." Daniel pulled back, scanning her face. "You're strong, Rosie. Stronger than you know." That night, as they ate a quiet dinner, canned soup and buttered bread, too tired for anything more elaborate, Daniel told her about a plan. About how he wasn't going to just sit and wait for the Silver Skulls to make their next move. "I spoke to a guy today," he said, voice low. "Nick Hartford. County Task Force. He's been undercover with the gang for months. He says they're planning something bigger. Something dangerous." Rosie listened, heart pounding anew. "We're going to stop them," Daniel said. His hand tightened around his coffee mug. "Before they can hurt anyone else." Trooper lifted his head at Daniel's tone, his intelligent eyes locked onto the man he clearly trusted as much as Rosie did. Rosie placed a hand on Trooper's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. A part of her wanted to beg her father to leave it alone, to stay with her where it was safe. But a bigger part of her, the part that had grown up watching him stand tall against everything life threw at them, knew better. They had to fight. They had to stand up. Just like he had taught her. The war for Sunrest Valley wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next day dawned with a heavy sky, clouds piling up like bruises across the horizon. Rosie stood at the window watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids rode bikes, mothers pulled trash cans to the curb, dogs barked at the mailman. It all seemed so normal, so painfully normal, that it made the unease in her chest even worse. Trooper sat beside her, ever vigilant. His injuries from the scuffle were healing, but he still favored his right side slightly, a subtle limp that broke Rosie's heart every time she noticed it. She reached down to scratch behind his ears. "You're the bravest boy," she whispered. Trooper leaned into her touch, letting out a soft huff of air. Behind her, Daniel moved around the kitchen, brewing coffee and skimming over papers scattered across the table. Maps of Sunrest Valley were marked with circles and notes, and somewhere amidst the clutter sat a thick folder stamped confidential in bold red letters. Nick Hartford was supposed to meet Daniel later that morning to finalize the plan. The bust. The one that would finally tear down the Silver Skulls and send Jackson Price to prison for good. Rosie knew it was dangerous. She also knew there was no talking her father out of it. At breakfast, Daniel tried to act casual, cracking jokes and commenting on the lopsided pancakes he made. Rosie played along, forcing smiles, but there was a tension between them that no amount of syrup could sweeten. When the knock came at the door, Trooper was up in an instant, hackles half raised. Daniel motioned for Rosie to stay back and peeked through the peephole. "It's Hartford," he said, unlocking the door. Nick Hartford looked rougher than before. His face was lined with exhaustion, his clothes plain and dusty. He stepped inside quickly, glancing around with a practiced wariness that never seemed to leave him. "Morning," he said, nodding at Rosie. Then to Daniel, "We've got movement." Daniel led him into the kitchen, and Rosie sat on the couch, straining to hear without looking like she was listening. Trooper plopped down beside her but kept his ears pricked toward the conversation. "The Silver Skulls are gearing up," Nick said in a low voice. "Tonight's the night. Old trucking depot near the freight lines. Midnight." Daniel cursed under his breath. "Weapons." Nick nodded grimly. M4S sidearms, body armor. Enough to start a war. "And Jackson?" Daniel pressed. "He'll be there," Nick confirmed. "Personally overseeing the deal. He's paranoid now. Knows he's running out of time." Daniel leaned back, exhaling sharply. "We have to move fast. Set up the perimeter without tipping them off." Nick slid a flash drive across the table. "All the details. Security cameras I planted, entry points, backup plans." Daniel picked it up, jaw set with determination. "And Rosie?" Nick asked, glancing toward the living room. His voice softened. "You got somewhere safe for her?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze drifting toward his daughter. Rosie met his eyes. She knew the question he didn't want to ask. "I'm staying with Trooper," she said firmly before he could speak. Daniel sighed heavily but didn't argue. He knew as well as she did that Trooper would defend her with his life. Nick stood, adjusting the worn leather jacket on his shoulders. I'll keep close to Jackson until the last minute. You hit hard and fast. No mercy. Daniel nodded. We'll be ready. As Nick left, Rosie watched her father lock the door behind him, sliding the bolt into place. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a bunker under siege. Daniel turned and knelt in front of her, resting his hands on her knees. Rosie, no matter what happens tonight, you stay inside. You stay with Trooper. Understand? She nodded, throat tight. I'll come back, he said. I promise. But promises felt fragile under a sky so heavy with impending violence. That night, Rosie sat cross-legged on her bed, Trooper lying across the door like a living barrier. The clock on her nightstand ticked relentlessly toward midnight. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind outside, made her nerves fray a little more. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. Stay safe. Stay hidden. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel suited up. Bulletproof vest, service weapon, radio earpiece. He and Rhea Morris moved in coordinated silence, a tight team among the broader task force gathering in unmarked vehicles around the trucking depot. The rain had started again, a cold drizzle that slicked the roads and turned the abandoned lot into a muddy quagmire. All units, the radio crackled. Suspects on site. Confirm visual. From their vantage point behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, Daniel and Rhea watched as the Silver Skulls rolled in. 4 motorcycles. 1 beat-up pickup truck. 1 semi-trailer, its back doors swinging open to reveal black crates marked with red tape. Jackson Price emerged from the cab of the truck, his scarred face twisted into a scowl as he barked orders. He looked exactly the way Rosie had described him, only meaner, more desperate. Nick Hartford was already there, blending seamlessly among the gang, playing the part of loyal soldier. But he shot Daniel a quick glance, a silent signal. It's time. Daniel whispered into his radio. On my mark. The storm outside masked the movement of the officers as they encircled the depot. Boots splashed in puddles. Radios buzzed quietly. Then Jackson's voice rang out. Get the gear loaded. We move now. He lifted a large assault rifle from one of the crates, inspecting it with satisfaction. That was the moment Daniel had been waiting for. Now, he shouted into the radio. Floodlights snapped on, blinding the bikers. Police, drop your weapons. For half a heartbeat, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked the night open. Shouts. Screams. The bikers scattered, some diving for cover, some firing blindly into the blinding lights. Daniel moved with precision, ducking behind crates, advancing yard by yard. His entire world narrowed to one focus. End this, end it fast, get home safe. At the heart of the chaos, Jackson Price roared in fury, firing wild bursts at the shadows closing in. Daniel locked eyes with him across the lot. This wasn't just a bust anymore. It was personal. Gunfire shattered the fragile night like glass. Daniel ducked behind a stack of wooden pallets, bullets slicing the air where he'd just been standing. His heart hammered in his ears, louder even than the cracks of gunfire. The warehouse echoed with chaos, shouts, engines revving, the heavy boots of law enforcement converging from all sides. He peeked around the corner, eyes zeroing in on Jackson Price, who moved like a wounded predator. Blood, lust, and desperation gleamed in Jackson's eyes as he fired wildly toward the flashing lights and advancing officers. His scar stood out in the floodlights, a jagged slash across his twisted expression. Daniel gritted his teeth. Jackson wasn't running, he was trying to make a final stand. Rhea, flank left. Daniel barked into his radio. Cut him off. Through the pouring rain and gun smoke, he saw Rhea moving, a shadow among shadows, circling to trap Jackson against the far wall of the warehouse. But Jackson was quick. He hurled a flashbang toward the left side of the lot, the grenade bouncing once before detonating with a blinding blast. Officers staggered back, momentarily disoriented. Daniel surged forward, using the confusion to close the gap. Jackson caught the movement and swung his rifle up. For a breathless moment, Daniel thought he was too late, but then a figure tackled Jackson from the side. Nick Hartford. The undercover agent slammed into Jackson, knocking him off balance. The rifle clattered to the muddy ground. Nick wrestled him down, fists flying in short, brutal arcs. Jackson roared, landing a heavy blow that sent Nick sprawling. Before Jackson could recover, Daniel was there, his service weapon leveled. Freeze! Daniel barked. Jackson hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. Daniel didn't wait. He surged forward, kicking the weapon out of Jackson's reach, then slamming him face first into the ground. Mud splashed up around them. Jackson thrashed, cursing and snarling like a feral animal, but Daniel pinned him with grim, unstoppable force. Handcuffs clicked around Jackson's wrists. The battle was over. Sirens wailed louder as backup flooded the scene. Officers rounded up the remaining gang members, dragging them from their hiding spots, securing crates of illegal weapons. The old trucking depot, once a shadowy haven for criminal deals, was now a tableau of flashing lights and grim-faced lawmen. Daniel stood over Jackson's prone form, breathing hard. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead. Every muscle in his body screamed with exhaustion, but deep inside, a fierce satisfaction roared. It was over. Dan. Rhea jogged up, breathless, helmet under one arm. We got 'em all. Clean sweep. Daniel nodded. Make sure the feds get those weapons tagged. I want Jackson's charges to stick like tar. Rhea clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. You did it. Daniel didn't return the smile. His mind had already shifted elsewhere, to a small, trembling girl waiting back home with a battered German shepherd guarding her side. I need to get home, he said, voice low. I need to see my daughter. Back in their house, Rosie sat curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. The news played on low volume, the screen filled with images of flashing police lights, confiscated weapons, men in cuffs. Trooper lay across her feet like a weighted blanket, his steady presence the only thing keeping her tethered. Her heart leapt every time headlights swept across the window. Was it Dad? Was he okay? Every second dragged like an hour. Finally, she heard the key in the lock. The door creaked open. Dad? She called out, voice cracking. Yeah, baby. It's me. Daniel stepped inside, rain dripping from his jacket, his badge still clipped to his belt. He looked exhausted, more worn than Rosie had ever seen him, but alive. Oh. Trooper jumped up with a bark, tail wagging furiously. Rosie dropped the blanket and ran to her father, slamming into him with enough force to almost knock him off balance. He caught her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she didn't care. You did it, she whispered against his chest. You stopped them. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes suspiciously shiny. We stopped them, he said, voice rough. All of us. He knelt and ruffled Trooper's fur, murmuring, especially you, buddy. Trooper barked once, short and proud. Daniel locked the door behind him and deadbolted it, but it was more out of habit than fear. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt safe again. Rosie dragged him to the couch, insisting he sit while she fetched a towel. She returned and fussed over him, dabbing at the rainwater soaking his jacket and hair. Daniel chuckled softly, a deep rumble that eased the last of the tension from her shoulders. They sat together in the warm glow of the living room, Trooper sprawled at their feet, the television murmuring in the background. Reports were already rolling in, Silver Skulls dismantled in major operation. Weapons seized. Leaders arrested. Town breathes a sigh of relief. Rosie leaned her head against her father's arm. Does this mean it's really over? Daniel hesitated for a long moment before answering. For now, he said honestly. There's always going to be people like Jackson. But as long as we stand together, they won't win. Rosie closed her eyes, listening to the steady thump of her father's heartbeat, the reassuring weight of Trooper's body pressed against her legs. Outside, the rain tapered off, leaving only the fresh, clean scent of renewal in the air. Inside, the little family sat in a cocoon of light and warmth, battered but unbroken. And somewhere deep inside her chest, for the first time in days, Rosie felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The sun broke over Sunrest Valley the next morning, washing the battered town in a soft, golden light. It was the kind of morning that used to feel ordinary, but now, to Rosie, it felt like a miracle. She stood on the porch with Trooper sitting tall beside her, watching as neighbors slowly came outside again, smiling tentative smiles, exchanging greetings without the sharp glances over their shoulders. A fresh breeze carried the scent of damp earth and blossoming trees. It felt like the town itself was breathing easier for the first time in months. Inside, Daniel worked at the kitchen table, finalizing his reports for the department. His bruised ribs protested with every breath, but he powered through, grimacing only when Rosie wasn't looking. There was still a trial ahead and paperwork and testimony, but for now the biggest threat was gone. Trooper's ears perked suddenly, his gaze snapping to the street. Rosie followed his line of sight, and froze. A black SUV rolled slowly past their house, tinted windows masking whoever was inside. Rosie's heart kicked against her ribs. Trooper let out a low, dangerous growl deep in his chest. Daniel must have sensed the change in the air because he was at the window in 2 strides. His eyes narrowed, watching the SUV crawl past, then disappear around the corner. He pulled out his phone and punched in a number. "Rhea," he barked when she picked up. "Possible surveillance. Black SUV, no plates. Send a patrol to sweep the area." Rosie felt the old fear slither back into her stomach, but Daniel turned to her with a grim smile. "They're desperate now," he said. "They know it's over, but they're trying to spook us." "Will they try again?" Rosie asked quietly. Daniel crouched so they were eye to eye. "Maybe. But they're fractured. Scattered. Without Jackson pulling the strings, they're just a bunch of cowards. And we'll be ready for them." Trooper pressed against Rosie's side, warm and steady. His silent presence was a balm against the fear creeping up her spine. Later that afternoon, after 2 patrol cars made a sweep of the neighborhood, Rosie finally allowed herself to relax a little. She helped Daniel repaint the front porch, covering over the ugly scars of the gang's vandalism with bright, cheerful blue. As she rolled the paintbrush over the old wood, Rosie realized something. Healing wasn't one big moment. It was hundreds of little ones. One coat of paint at a time. One laugh. One safe night's sleep. That evening, Daniel made spaghetti for dinner. It was a messy, chaotic affair, with sauce splattering everywhere and Trooper stealing a meatball when they weren't looking. Rosie laughed, a real laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her chest, and the sound made Daniel glance over, smiling wider than he had in months. After dinner, Rosie curled up with Trooper on the couch while Daniel clicked through TV channels. They settled on an old detective movie, the kind with crackling black and white footage and characters who always seemed to have a witty comeback ready. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rosie felt normal. Safe. Oh. But peace is never permanent. As the credits rolled, Daniel's phone buzzed sharply on the coffee table. He picked it up, and immediately the warmth drained from his face. "What is it?" Rosie asked, heart rate quickening. Daniel stared at the screen for a beat too long before answering. "Jackson's escaped." The room plunged into a silence so heavy Rosie could barely breathe. "How?" she whispered. Daniel scrubbed a hand over his face. "Hospital transfer. They staged a fake EMT team. Took him right out from under the sheriff's watch." Trooper let out a low, warning whine as if sensing the tension spike. Rosie clutched at the blanket around her shoulders. "Is he coming here?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "If he's smart, he'll run far away and never show his face in this county again." He looked out the window into the darkened street, his voice dropping lower. "But Jackson Price isn't smart. He's vindictive." Trooper rose to his feet, standing between Rosie and the front door, muscles coiled tight. Every line of his body screamed one thing. "Come and try." Daniel was already moving, locking every door and window, checking his weapon, speaking in rapid-fire instructions. "Rosie, get upstairs. Stay in my room. Keep low. Trooper stays with you." "But Dad," she started to protest. "No buts," he snapped, then softened his voice. "Please, Rosie. I need you safe." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, but she nodded. She grabbed Trooper's collar and led him upstairs, heart hammering against her ribs. Upstairs, the world felt muffled as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rosie crouched beside the bed, Trooper pressed against her side, the soft creak of the old mattress frame loud in the silence. Below, she could hear her father moving, methodical, controlled, fearless, preparing for whatever might come through the door. Minutes crawled past like hours. Then the first crash echoed downstairs, the unmistakable shatter of glass. Rosie bit down on a scream, pressing her hands to her mouth. Trooper growled low in his throat, muscles tense and ready. Footsteps pounded across the porch. Then the front door shook violently on its hinges. And through the thin walls of the house, Rosie heard the voice she would never forget. "You think you beat me, Collins?" Jackson snarled. "You're dead wrong." Rosie squeezed her eyes shut, praying. "Please be careful, Dad. Please." Then came Daniel's voice, sharp, commanding, steady as bedrock. "You've lost Jackson. Walk away." "Not without a little revenge first," Jackson spat. A second later, a gunshot ripped through the night. Trooper lunged forward, but Rosie grabbed his collar, holding him back, tears spilling down her cheeks. Another shot. A scuffle. Shouts. Then silence. An endless, aching silence. Rosie didn't even realize she was holding her breath until she heard it, the creak of the stairs. Heavy boots coming up, one slow step at a time. She pressed herself into the corner, clutching Trooper's fur. The door swung open. And there stood her father. Alive. Bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his shirt torn at the shoulder but standing tall. His service weapon was still clutched in his right hand. Trooper barked once, sharp and joyous. Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees and pulling Rosie into his arms. "It's over," he whispered fiercely against her hair. "For real this time. He's not getting up again." And Rosie, sobbing into his chest, finally believed him. The world outside their battered little house seemed to hold its breath. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second, until red and blue lights flickered across the broken porch and cracked windows. Officers stormed through the front door seconds later, weapons drawn, shouts filling the hallways. Rosie clung to her father, still feeling the rumble of his heartbeat against her ear, even as Trooper barked, ears flat against his skull, his body trembling with residual adrenaline. Daniel stood, keeping Rosie behind him, and holstered his weapon slowly, carefully, raising his free hand to identify himself. "Officer Daniel Collins," he said, voice rough. "Suspect neutralized. Upstairs hallway." Trooper didn't move from Rosie's side. His tail was low, his entire posture protective but under control, ever the soldier even now. Within minutes, the scene was secured. Officer Rhea Morris arrived, her face pale and tight as she rushed up the stairs 2 at a time. She spotted Daniel and Rosie and let out a shaky breath of relief. "My God, Dan," she said. "Are you hurt?" Daniel touched the gash on his forehead, winced slightly. "I'll live." Downstairs, 2 paramedics zipped Jackson Price into a body bag. His reign of terror in Sunrest Valley had ended, not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, not with months of drawn-out trials, but here in a broken home where he had underestimated a father's will to protect his child. The house, though battered, had held. Just like the people inside it. The following days blurred together. The media descended on Sunrest Valley like vultures, eager to spin the takedown of the Silver Skulls into a headline-grabbing spectacle. Reporters camped outside the police station, the grocery store, even down the block from Rosie's school. Photos of Daniel in his uniform and shots of Trooper standing tall beside Rosie flooded the internet. "Local hero family ends gang's reign of fear," one headline blared. "Girl and her brave K9 save the day," another read. Rosie hated the attention at first. It felt invasive, wrong to turn something so raw and terrifying into a spectacle. But Daniel reminded her that sometimes telling the story wasn't about boasting, it was about giving others hope. "If one person finds courage because of you and Trooper," he said gently, "then it's worth it." Rosie didn't fully believe it until the letters started arriving. Stacks of them. Cards from strangers across the country. Emails to the station. Handwritten notes left at their porch. "Thank you for standing up. Thank you for reminding us good still exists." It overwhelmed her. It humbled her. It planted something in her chest that began to grow, a fierce, stubborn pride not in what had happened to her, but in how she had faced it. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. She was a fighter. And she had the scars, and the strength, to prove it. One afternoon about 2 weeks after that final night, Rosie sat in the sunny backyard, throwing a tennis ball for Trooper. His limp had mostly faded, and though he wasn't as fast as before, he chased the ball with a joyful bark, tail wagging in wide, lazy sweeps. Daniel watched from the porch, sipping coffee. "You know," he said, voice casual but thick with meaning, "they're planning something at the station." Rosie tossed the ball again. "Something good." Daniel smiled, the kind of rare, crinkly-eyed smile that always made her feel like the world was right. "Yeah. A ceremony. They want to honor Trooper." Rosie dropped the ball mid-throw and turned to him, wide-eyed. "Trooper?" "Yeah," Daniel chuckled. "Apparently saving an officer's life, and a whole town's future, gets you more than just dog treats." Rosie knelt and hugged Trooper, who panted happily against her shoulder. "What about you, Dad?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "I'm just glad it's over." But Rosie saw it in his eyes, the pride he tried to hide. The weight he had carried, the fear that had nearly broken him, now lifted. They were still here. Still standing. And stronger than ever. The day of the ceremony, the town gathered at the local park. Folding chairs lined the grassy field. A small stage was erected with a podium decorated in blue and gold. Daniel wore his dress uniform. Rosie wore a simple white dress. Trooper wore a new collar with a gleaming silver badge shaped like a shield. As the mayor gave a long speech about courage and resilience, Rosie barely heard a word. She watched her father standing tall in the front row. She watched Trooper sitting patiently by her feet, oblivious to the attention focused only on her. When they called Trooper up, the crowd erupted into applause. Rosie led him up the steps, her hands steady on his collar. Chief Woodbury pinned a special medal to Trooper's harness, his gruff voice catching slightly as he said, "For bravery above and beyond the call of duty." Trooper barked once, tail wagging, and the crowd laughed through their tears. Later, as the crowd thinned and children ran across the grass, Rosie sat with Daniel on a bench under the shade of an old oak tree. Trooper sprawled at their feet, chewing contentedly on a new toy someone had gifted him. "Do you think?" Rosie hesitated, staring at the clouds. "Mom would be proud?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver locket. Rosie gasped softly. She hadn't seen it in years. Inside was a tiny photo of her mother, smiling wide, arms wrapped around a younger, happier Daniel. "I know she is," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Every step you took. Every time you chose courage over fear. She's been right here the whole time." Rosie blinked back tears and clutched the locket tight. "I miss her," she whispered. "I know," Daniel said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I do too. But she's with us. Always." The wind stirred the leaves above them. Trooper huffed in his sleep. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by family, Rosie understood something that would stay with her forever. Real bravery isn't loud. It's not about the news cameras or medals. It's the quiet decision to keep moving forward, one breath, one step, one day at a time, even when the fear feels bigger than you are. And sometimes the strongest armor in the world is love. Spring bled into early summer, and Sunrest Valley slowly stitched itself back together. Shops that had boarded up during the worst of the gang's reign through opened their doors again. Families began hosting backyard barbecues. Kids rode their bikes without darting glances over their shoulders. Life didn't snap back to normal overnight. It grew back, stubborn and beautiful, like grass breaking through cracked concrete. At the center of it all stood the Collins family. Stronger, wiser, and whole. Rosie found herself laughing more easily these days. She slept through the night without jolting awake at every creak of the house. Her grades even started climbing again, her mind finally clear enough to focus on math problems and history dates. Trooper was healing too. His limp had almost disappeared, leaving only a slight stiffness on cold mornings. His fur grew back thicker over the scars on his side, a soft, shining coat that Rosie brushed every evening while telling him about her day. He never needed to understand the words. He simply listened. And sometimes that's all anyone needed. One warm Saturday morning, Daniel surprised Rosie by pulling a cardboard box out of the hall closet. It was labeled simply, "Mom's Things." They sat cross-legged on the living room floor, sifting through old photo albums, faded postcards, a battered recipe book filled with smudged notes. Rosie traced her fingers over pictures of a woman with laughing eyes and an infectious smile. She was brave, Daniel said, his voice thick. Braver than anyone gave her credit for. Rosie smiled through her tears. "Just like you." Daniel laughed, wiping at his eyes. "And just like you." In the bottom of the box, wrapped in soft tissue paper, Rosie found something unexpected, a small hand-sewn badge in the shape of a heart. Embroidered across it in careful blue stitches were the words, "Protector. Always." Daniel leaned over her shoulder and chuckled softly. "Your mom made that for me when I graduated the academy." Rosie turned the badge over in her hands, an idea forming. Later that afternoon, with Daniel's blessing, Rosie stitched the badge onto Trooper's new harness. Right over his heart. When she showed Daniel, he blinked hard, pride and grief warring beautifully in his face. "He deserves it," Rosie said simply. Daniel could only nod. Summer came in fully then, sweet and slow, and with it came a new rhythm for their little family. Every Saturday, Daniel, Rosie, and Trooper walked down to the farmer's market. Vendors set up tents under colorful awnings, selling everything from homemade jam to fresh flowers. Children ran barefoot across the grass. Musicians strummed guitars in the shade. People always stopped them. They patted Trooper's head, thanked Daniel for his service, offered Rosie shy smiles and cups of lemonade. For a while, Rosie hated the attention. But slowly she realized it wasn't about fame or pity. It was about belonging. The town hadn't just survived. It had healed. And she had helped. One afternoon, after a particularly busy market day, they stopped by the park where it had all begun. The place where Trooper had been honored, where Rosie had stood trembling in front of a sea of faces and found her strength. The sun was warm. The breeze smelled like cut grass and hope. Rosie sat under the big oak tree, Trooper stretched out beside her, and Daniel leaned against the trunk, arms crossed, watching the town bustle with new life. "You know," Daniel said after a long stretch of comfortable silence, "the chief asked me if I wanted a transfer." Rosie's heart seized. "A transfer?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Bigger town. More resources. Less history." Rosie looked out across the park. The children, the laughter, the safe streets. "And?" she asked, voice shaking slightly. Daniel smiled. "I told him no." Rosie blinked at him. "This is our home," Daniel said simply. "We fought for it. We bled for it. I'm not running away." Tears pricked Rosie's eyes, but they were good tears, proud tears. She reached over and rested her hand on Trooper's back. "We're not running either," she whispered. Trooper thumped his tail lazily as if approving. They sat there until the sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything in hues of gold and pink. And Rosie thought about everything they had been through, the fear, the pain, the long nights when hope seemed like a cruel joke. She thought about the nights Trooper had kept watch while she cried herself to sleep. She thought about her father's hands, steady even when the world collapsed around them. She thought about her mother's locket, warm against her chest even now, and the tiny badge stitched onto Trooper's harness. Protector. Always. Not just a word. A promise. A few days later, something special happened. The mayor called a town meeting and unveiled a bronze plaque in the center of the park. It bore the names of the officers who had helped take down the Silver Skulls, and right at the bottom, engraved with equal honor, were two words: Trooper Collins. Rosie stood there, hand in her father's, staring at the shining plaque until the letters blurred. Not because of sadness. Because of pride. Because they had written their story here in the very heart of the town. A story of fear, yes. But more importantly, a story of resilience. Of love. Of family. That night, as crickets sang outside their windows and a cool breeze stirred the curtains, Rosie lay in bed with Trooper curled against her legs. She whispered into the darkness. "We're safe, Trooper." The dog huffed in agreement, tail thudding once against the mattress. Rosie closed her eyes and smiled. Because sometimes the world breaks you. But sometimes, you fight back. And sometimes, with love and courage stitched deep into your soul, you win. In the end, Rosie, Daniel, and Trooper showed us that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing up even when fear tries to break you. It's about loyalty that never falters and love that protects when the world feels darkest. If you found strength in their story, share this video with someone who needs a reminder. The strongest families are forged in the fires of adversity. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful real-life inspired stories. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to hit that like button to help these stories reach others who need hope too.